The cafe was small, tucked away between tall office buildings, the kind of place most people passed without noticing. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the sound of quiet chatter and the soft clinking of cups. Among the few workers who kept the place running was a young waitress who moved quickly but quietly, always polite, always smiling even when her eyes showed she was tired. Every morning before sunrise, she would wake up, make a cup of weak tea, and check on her mother before leaving for work. Her mother had been sick for years and the medicines were expensive. That was why she took the job at the cafe. It wasn't what she dreamed of doing, but it paid enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. She never complained. To most customers, she was just the girl who brought their coffee and wiped their tables. But to her, each day was a silent test of patience and strength. She didn't have much, but she had a heart full of quiet hope. And when she looked at the old piano sitting in the corner of the cafe, that hope stirred a little, like a spark trying to catch fire again. No one ever played that piano. It had been there since before she started working. Dust gathered on its wooden surface, and one of its legs was slightly uneven. But every night after closing, when everyone had gone home and the street outside had grown still, she would sit at that piano and let her fingers find the keys. The notes she played were soft, uncertain at first, but soon they carried her away to a world where her worries didn't exist. She had learned to play when she was a little girl. Her father, before he passed, had saved for months to buy her a second-hand keyboard. He told her that music could heal hearts and speak where words failed. Those lessons stayed with her even when life got hard. She had dreamed of studying music professionally, maybe performing one day. But when her mother fell ill, she left everything behind to care for her. The dream faded into a memory, like a song half forgotten. Still, she never stopped playing. Music was her secret, something she didn't talk about with anyone. When her coworkers asked what she did after work, she would just smile and say she liked quiet evenings. No one knew that in those quiet hours her fingers danced over keys, telling stories only her heart understood. On some nights, the cafe owner would lock up early and leave her with the keys. She would stay a little longer, playing softly so the sound wouldn't drift outside. Those were the moments that kept her going. She didn't play for fame or money. She played because it reminded her that somewhere inside she was still alive, still dreaming. But dreams can feel cruel when life keeps pushing back. The rent was late again. Her mother's condition was getting worse, and the doctor had prescribed a new medicine that cost more than she could afford. She took on extra shifts, standing on her feet for 10 hours straight, smiling at strangers, pretending she wasn't exhausted. She told herself it would be fine. It always had to be fine. Then one Friday evening, something unusual happened. The cafe was unusually busy, filled with laughter and expensive perfume. A group of well-dressed people had come in, business owners, investors, and one man everyone seemed to know. He was older, tall, and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The waiters whispered that he was a billionaire, a man who owned several companies in the city. She didn't pay him much attention at first. To her, he was just another customer. She greeted him politely, took his order, and went about her work. But she could feel his eyes follow her as she moved from table to table. There was something sharp about the way he watched her. Not unkind, just curious, as if he was trying to figure out something she wasn't saying. When she brought the group their drinks, he noticed the old piano in the corner. He asked, half joking, "Does anyone ever play that thing?" The cafe manager laughed. "No, sir. It's mostly for decoration now. No one here knows how." The billionaire raised an eyebrow, amused. "No one?" Before the manager could answer, his eyes flicked toward her. She felt her heart jump. She tried to look away, but he caught the tiny spark in her expression, the kind that appears when someone touches a hidden truth. He smiled slightly. "What about you?" he asked. "You look like you might know something about music." The question made her freeze. The cafe fell silent for a moment. Everyone was looking at her now. The other workers, the guests, even her manager. She forced a small laugh and shook her head. "Oh, no, sir. I just serve coffee." But he wasn't convinced. "Come on," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Surely you can play a few notes." "Just one song," she hesitated. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. The idea of playing in front of all these people made her stomach twist. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. The feeling that she didn't belong in that world anymore. That her music was something private. Too fragile for strangers to hear. The billionaire noticed her hesitation and gave a teasing smile. "What's the harm? We could all use a bit of music tonight." The manager tried to intervene. "Sir, she's just a waitress. She's never—" But the man interrupted, his tone still calm but firm. "Then let's find out. It wasn't a request anymore." The room went quiet. Even the background music playing from the speakers faded as someone turned it down. She looked around. The eyes of every person in the cafe were on her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought they might hear it. For a moment she wanted to refuse. She wanted to run to the back room and hide, but something stopped her. Maybe pride, maybe the quiet voice inside her that whispered she still had something left to prove. Slowly she put down the tray and walked toward the piano. The sound of her footsteps on the floor felt louder than usual. The air in the cafe was heavy, expectant. She sat on the wooden bench and placed her trembling hands on the keys. The piano was old, slightly out of tune, and the dust made her fingers slip a little. But when she pressed the first note, the sound carried through the room. Gentle, hesitant, like a memory returning after years of silence. The billionaire leaned forward slightly. The others whispered quietly, waiting to see what she would do. Her hands paused over the keys. For a few seconds, she closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw her father's face, the way he used to sit beside her when she was small, nodding proudly as she played. She remembered her mother's soft humming from the kitchen, the warmth of their tiny home before everything changed, and then she began to play. The melody was slow, almost fragile at first. But as her fingers found their rhythm, the sound deepened, flowing like water down a quiet stream. The chatter in the cafe faded. The only thing that remained was the music, her music, speaking the words she had never dared to say aloud. Every note carried a piece of her story. The sleepless nights, the quiet prayers, the weight of dreams buried under responsibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. The billionaire's expression changed. The smug amusement was gone, replaced by something else. Surprise, maybe even respect. The people who had been laughing moments ago now sat in silence, listening. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, and she played on, lost in the sound, unaware of the people watching her. For those few minutes, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't struggling. She was simply herself, the girl who once believed that music could change the world. When she finished, her fingers lingered on the final note, letting it fade into the quiet air. The room was completely still. No one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped just to listen. She looked up, unsure of what to expect. The billionaire's eyes met hers. There was no mockery there now, only silence and something softer. Something like admiration. Then slowly, the cafe erupted into applause. People stood, clapping, smiling, cheering. The manager looked stunned. Her coworkers stared as if they had never truly seen her before. She sat there speechless, her heart racing. She hadn't meant to impress anyone. She had only wanted to remember what it felt like to be alive. As the applause continued, the billionaire smiled faintly and said, almost to himself, "I was right. You did know something about music." She lowered her eyes, trying to hide the tears forming there. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, and though she didn't know it yet, that one simple performance would change the course of her life forever. The sound of clapping still echoed in her mind long after the cafe had closed that night. She walked home in the cool air, the city lights shimmering on wet pavement after a light rain. Her hands still tingled from the piano keys, and she couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head. The applause had felt unreal, like she had stepped out of her own life and into someone else's for a few minutes. But beneath the small joy was confusion. Why had that man insisted she play? Why did he care? Billionaires didn't come to small cafes to listen to waitresses. He had looked at her differently. Not like a customer looks at a worker, but as if he had seen something hidden, something she wasn't even sure existed anymore. At home, her mother was asleep, the soft sound of her breathing filling the small apartment. She tucked a blanket over her, then sat by the window staring at the streetlights outside. She whispered to herself. It was just one song. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't just a song. It was the part of her that had been sleeping for years, suddenly awake again. The next morning, she returned to work expecting everything to go back to normal. But it didn't. Her coworkers kept smiling at her, whispering behind the counter. The manager seemed nervous around her, as if he wasn't sure how to treat her anymore. Customers came in asking if the girl who played last night was there. Some even wanted to hear her play again. She felt embarrassed and proud at the same time. She didn't want attention, she only wanted peace. But somehow, that one performance had changed how people saw her. Late in the afternoon, the manager called her into the back office. She thought maybe she was in trouble for playing without permission. But when she stepped inside, the billionaire was sitting there waiting. He looked different in daylight, less intimidating, but still powerful. He stood when she entered and smiled slightly. "I hope I didn't cause you any trouble," he said. She shook her head, unsure what to say. "No, sir. It's fine. I just didn't expect all that last night." "I didn't either," he said. "I expected a simple tune, maybe a short melody. But what you played, it wasn't just music. It was emotion. Real emotion. You silenced an entire room full of people used to talking over everything." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. "It's just something I do for myself," she said quietly. "I don't really play for others." He nodded, studying her face for a moment. "You should," he said finally. "You have something rare. You don't just play notes. You tell stories. That's what real music is." Before she could reply, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. "I'd like to hear you play again," he said. "Professionally. I own a music company. We help young musicians record and perform. If you're interested, call this number." She stared at the card in her hand, unsure if this was real. I don't think I'm ready for that," she said softly. "I haven't played in front of anyone for years." He gave a small smile. "Maybe. But sometimes the world doesn't wait for you to feel ready." With that, he thanked the manager for the coffee and left. She stood there for a long moment after he was gone, the card still trembling in her hand. For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus. Her coworkers teased her gently, saying she'd been discovered. She laughed it off, pretending it didn't matter. But when she got home that night, she sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the card again. The company name looked expensive. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head saying, "Don't be afraid when life gives you a chance." Her mother noticed her distraction. "You look far away," she said softly. She smiled. Something strange happened at work. Her mother listened quietly as she told her about the man, the piano, the applause, and the offer. When she finished, her mother's eyes were filled with tears. "Maybe this is your moment," she whispered. "You've given up so much for me. Maybe it's time to follow your music again." The next few days passed in a blur. She kept the card in her pocket but didn't call. Every time she thought about it, fear whispered in her ear. Fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of being told she wasn't good enough. The world of music felt so far away, like another lifetime. She was just a waitress now. Then one evening, as she was closing up, she found an envelope on the counter with her name written neatly on it. Inside was a letter from the billionaire's assistant, inviting her to visit their company studio the following week. They wanted her to try recording one song. Her heart raced as she read it. This wasn't just a casual offer anymore. It was real. The day of the visit, she dressed in her best clothes. Simple, clean, nothing fancy. She took the bus across town, clutching the letter tightly. The studio was in a tall glass building that gleamed in the sun. When she walked inside, she felt small and out of place. People in expensive suits walked past her, holding phones and talking about meetings. The receptionist smiled politely and directed her to a recording room upstairs. When she entered, she froze. The billionaire was already there, speaking with a few people who looked like producers. He turned and greeted her warmly. "I'm glad you came," he said. She nodded nervously. "I almost didn't." "That's usually how it goes," he said with a gentle laugh. "Sit down. Don't worry. This is just a test run. Play whatever feels right." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the recording equipment. The piano in front of her was grand and polished, shining under soft lights. She touched the keys, feeling their smooth surface. Her reflection looked back at her in the glossy lid, a simple girl sitting in a world that didn't belong to her. Then she remembered her mother's words. Maybe this was her moment. She began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, but soon her hands found their rhythm. The melody filled the room, echoing softly off the walls. The producers exchanged glances. The billionaire stood near the window, listening silently. The music carried a quiet sadness, but also strength. the kind that comes from someone who survived too much and still dares to dream. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a moment, just like the cafe had. Then one of the producers exhaled slowly and said, "That was beautiful." The billionaire smiled. "See," he said. "I told you she was special." She blushed, unsure how to react. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say you'll come back," he replied simply. "We can help you record properly. You have something people need to hear." She hesitated. "I can't afford lessons or studio time." He waved a hand. "Don't worry about that. I'll cover it. Think of it as an investment in real talent." It sounded too good to be true. She had heard stories about people being taken advantage of, so she asked carefully, "Why me? You don't even know me." He looked at her seriously. "Because I remember what it's like to see potential in someone who doesn't see it in themselves. I was lucky that someone once believed in me. Now it's my turn to do the same." Something in his voice made her believe him. She agreed to come back the following week. When she told her mother that night, her mother's eyes filled with pride. "I knew it," she said softly. "Your father would have been so proud of you." The next few days were a mix of excitement and fear. She practiced on the cafe piano after hours, polishing the melody she wanted to record. Her co-workers listened quietly, offering words of encouragement. For the first time, she felt supported, seen. On the day of her second visit, she walked into the studio with a little more confidence. The billionaire was waiting, smiling when he saw her. "Ready?" he asked. This time she nodded without hesitation. She played a song she had written years ago, one she had never shared with anyone. It was about love, loss, and holding on to hope. When she finished, tears filled her eyes and she realized everyone in the room was silent again. The billionaire clapped softly. "That's the one," he said. "That song will change your life." She didn't fully understand what he meant yet, but she could feel it. Something inside her had shifted. The girl who had once been afraid to play was gone. What remained was someone braver, someone ready to take a chance. As she walked home that night, the city lights seemed brighter than usual. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt hope rising, real, unstoppable hope. And somewhere far behind her, in that quiet cafe, the dust-covered piano waited, proud that its keys had started a story no one had seen coming. The next few weeks felt like a dream she didn't quite believe was real. Every morning she still went to the cafe, serving coffee and cleaning tables, but something inside her had changed. The same customers who once ignored her now smiled warmly, some even asking if she was the girl who played that night. She'd blush and nod quietly, though part of her still struggled to believe any of it had truly happened. On her days off, she went to the studio. Each visit felt like stepping into another world. The glass walls, the glowing lights, the quiet hum of instruments. It was so far from her small apartment and the noisy cafe. The billionaire always greeted her kindly, sometimes staying to listen, sometimes leaving her alone to work with the music team. He didn't talk much about business with her, but every word he said carried weight. He was a man who had built his life on decisions, and now one of those decisions was her. She practiced for hours, refining her touch, learning how to blend emotion with discipline. The producers helped her adjust her tempo and tone, but they all agreed her real strength was feeling, the way her music made people stop and listen. They called it honesty and sound. One evening, after a long recording session, she stepped outside the studio and found the billionaire waiting by his car. The city lights reflected in the glass building behind him, and he gave a small nod when he saw her. "You've made progress," he said simply. She smiled shyly. "I'm trying my best." He studied her for a moment, then asked, "Do you know why I wanted you to play that night in the cafe?" She shook her head. "Because I could tell you were different," he said. "Everyone in that room was loud, talking, showing off, but you moved quietly, like someone who was used to listening instead of speaking. People like that usually have stories worth hearing." His words caught her off guard. She didn't know how to respond. "I just didn't think anyone noticed me," she said softly. He gave a faint smile. "The right people always notice. It just takes time." He offered to drive her home that night. She hesitated but accepted. During the ride, he asked her about her childhood, her father, and how she learned to play. She told him everything, how her father saved for months to buy her a small keyboard, how they would sit together after dinner and play until it was too late. how music was the last gift he ever gave her before he passed away. The billionaire listened silently, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said quietly after a pause, "the people who start with nothing often create the most beautiful things. Maybe that's what gives them depth." When he dropped her off outside her building, she thanked him and started to get out. But he said one last thing. "Don't let fear convince you that you don't belong in the world you're meant for." She didn't sleep much that night. His words kept echoing in her mind. For years, she had convinced herself that her dream had expired, that people like her didn't get second chances. But now she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. The next week, she recorded the same song again, this time with full accompaniment, strings, soft percussion, and a cello that added a deep, emotional undercurrent. When the final note faded, even the sound engineer whispered, "That was magic." The billionaire walked into the studio just as they finished. He listened to the playback quietly, eyes closed, not moving until the last note ended. Then he turned to her and said, "This song needs to be heard." She blinked. "You mean?" He nodded. "We'll release it." Her heart raced. "But I don't have a name or a fan base or—" He raised a hand. "Let the music speak first. The rest will follow." He handled everything. The recording rights, the release date, even the design of the album cover. She felt overwhelmed but grateful. It wasn't about money for her. It was about being given a chance to be heard. A week later, her song went live online. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few listens, a few polite comments. But within days, messages began pouring in. People from all over the world wrote about how the song made them cry, how it reminded them of love, loss, or quiet hope. Some said it helped them sleep. Others said it gave them courage. She sat on her bed at night, reading each message in disbelief. The cafe girl who once played for no one now had people listening across oceans. It felt unreal, too big to process. At the cafe, things changed too. Strangers came in asking for her by name. A local newspaper even wrote a small story about the waitress with a piano dream. Her manager started smiling proudly whenever someone asked about her, pretending he had always believed in her from the start. But success brought new challenges. Some coworkers grew distant, jealous even. "Must be nice," one of them muttered one day. "A billionaire notices you and suddenly you're famous." She didn't know what to say. She never wanted attention or envy. She only wanted to play. Still, she couldn't deny that her life was no longer simple. One evening, the billionaire invited her to a private dinner to celebrate the song's success. It wasn't in a fancy ballroom, just a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. When she arrived, he congratulated her warmly. "You did it," he said. She smiled. "We did it." He shook his head. "No, you did. I only opened the door. You walked through it." The evening felt light, almost peaceful. They talked about music, life, and how sometimes talent is found in the most unexpected places. She asked him if he had always wanted to be rich. He laughed softly. "No," he said. "I wanted to be free, but sometimes success traps you too. That's why people like you matter. You remind us what purity looks like." After dinner, they walked by the water. The city lights shimmered in gentle waves. She told him she still worked at the cafe because it kept her grounded. "It's the place that started everything," she said. "I don't want to forget where I came from." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "That's what will keep you real. Don't lose that." As the weeks passed, her song continued to grow in popularity. Radio stations started playing it. Small music blogs called it a masterpiece of emotion. Invitations began to arrive. Small performances, interviews, even a local TV feature. She tried to stay calm, but inside she felt like her world was spinning. Through it all, the billionaire remained her quiet supporter. He didn't demand credit or attention. He only offered guidance when she asked. He reminded her to stay patient, to focus on the music rather than the noise around it. But success also brought pressure. During one recording session, she couldn't get a piece right. Her fingers shook and frustration filled her chest. "Maybe I'm not ready for this," she said, stepping away from the piano. The billionaire, who had been watching from the corner, spoke softly. "Do you remember how you played that first night? You weren't thinking about perfection then. You were just feeling. That's what people fell in love with, your truth. Don't let fear make you mechanical." She nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and sat back down. When she played again, the music flowed naturally, filled with heart instead of pressure. That night, as she packed up to leave, the billionaire said, "Every great story has a turning point. This is yours. From here, the world will start to watch closely. Be ready for that." She smiled wearily. "I just want to keep playing. That's all I care about." He looked at her with quiet pride. "And that's exactly why you'll go far." She didn't know what the future would hold. Fame, money, maybe more opportunities, but deep down, she promised herself something simple. No matter how far she went, she would never forget the sound of that first piano note in the cafe, or the feeling of being seen for the first time. As she walked home under the night sky, the city lights flickered like stars. She felt tired but content. The world around her was changing fast, but her heart stayed the same, filled with music, with gratitude, and with the unshakable belief that sometimes life gives you one moment that changes everything. She didn't know it yet, but that moment was only the beginning. Her life started changing faster than she could understand. The song that began in a small cafe corner was now everywhere, on the radio, in cafes, and on people's playlists. Sometimes, when she walked past a store and heard her own melody playing, she had to stop for a second just to believe it was real. The billionaire's company released a short video of her playing in the studio. It wasn't fancy, just her sitting at the piano in a simple dress, lost in the music. That video reached millions of people within days. Comments flooded in from every corner of the world. Some called her the voice of emotion without words. Others said her music healed something inside them. But while her world was blooming, it also began to feel heavier. The sudden attention brought new people, agents, reporters, producers, all talking about what she should do next. Everyone had opinions. "You need a second song. We should plan a live concert. Let's make an album." It was overwhelming. She was grateful, but sometimes she missed the quiet days when all she needed to worry about was her next coffee order or her mother's medicine schedule. Now she had meetings, interviews, and deadlines. It was exciting but exhausting. Through it all, the billionaire stayed calm. He didn't pressure her. Instead, he guided her when she felt lost. "Take your time," he told her one day in his office. "The world moves fast, but real art doesn't. Don't rush what's meant to last." She smiled weakly. "I'm trying, but sometimes I feel like everyone's waiting for me to fail." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Let them wait. The only person you have to prove anything to is yourself." Those words stayed with her. She spent her nights practicing, writing new melodies, experimenting with soft notes and raw feelings. Some songs made her cry while playing them. Others reminded her of her father, and how proud he would have been. Music had become her language again, her way of telling the world what she couldn't say in words. One afternoon, she received a call that changed her mood completely. Her mother's health had suddenly declined. The doctor said she needed a minor operation, not dangerous but urgent. She dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. Sitting by her mother's bed, she held her hand and whispered softly, "You're going to be fine, okay? I'll take care of it." Her mother smiled weakly. "I'm proud of you," she said. "No matter what happens, remember that. Your music is beautiful, but your heart is even more so." Those words broke her inside. She stayed at the hospital every night, barely sleeping. The billionaire came by one evening, bringing food and flowers. "You should rest," he told her gently. "I can't," she said. "Not until she's better." He didn't argue. He just sat quietly beside her, offering silent support. In that moment, she realized that behind all his power and money, he was still human, someone who understood loss, patience, and pain. When her mother finally recovered after a few weeks, the relief she felt was beyond words. But during those sleepless nights, something inside her had shifted. She wrote a new song, soft, slow, full of emotion. It was about love that survives even in silence. She played it for her mother first, and when she finished, tears rolled down both their faces. She decided to record it. The billionaire arranged a quiet session. No big crew this time. Just her, a piano, and a single microphone. The lights were dim. She closed her eyes and began to play. The melody flowed like a heartbeat, gentle but full of life. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The billionaire simply whispered, "That one will reach souls." He was right. When they released it, the song spread faster than anyone expected. People called it the Song of Stillness. It trended everywhere. Music channels played it, and talk shows wanted to interview her. She couldn't understand how something so personal had touched so many strangers. But maybe that was the magic of honesty. People could feel it, even if they didn't know the story behind it. The more famous she became, the more she tried to stay humble. She still took the bus sometimes, still visited the cafe where everything began. The piano there had been repaired and polished now. The owner proudly told everyone that the famous pianist started here. Every time she saw it, she smiled. One evening, she walked into the cafe quietly, wearing a scarf to hide her face. It was nearly empty, just a few customers. She sat at the piano and began to play softly. At first, no one noticed, but slowly the room fell silent. People looked up, recognizing the melody. By the time she finished, a small crowd had gathered. Someone whispered, "It's her." The applause filled the room just like that first night. But this time she didn't feel nervous. She smiled, bowed her head slightly, and left before anyone could stop her. It felt like coming full circle. Meanwhile, the billionaire watched her rise with quiet pride. He rarely showed emotion, but those who knew him noticed a change. He seemed lighter, more patient. She had brought a kind of peace into his busy world. He had built companies, bought buildings, and signed million-dollar deals, but nothing had moved him like that first moment in the cafe when her music silenced the noise. One day, he invited her to his home, a large house on the edge of the city, surrounded by gardens and glass walls. It was quiet, beautiful, and full of art. She was nervous walking through it. Everything looked expensive and perfect. He showed her his study where an old piano stood in the corner. "I used to play a little," he admitted. "Not well, but it helped me think," she smiled. "Maybe you should start again," he chuckled. "Maybe I will." Then his tone softened. "Do you know why I helped you?" She shook her head. "Because once someone helped me when I had nothing," he said. "I promised myself that if I ever met someone who reminded me of that time, I'd do the same for them. You gave me that chance." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Gratitude filled her chest, but words felt small compared to what she felt. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He smiled gently. "Thank you for reminding me what faith looks like." They sat at the piano together that evening. She played a soft melody while he listened, eyes closed. The world outside was fading into dusk, and inside the house only music filled the air. In the weeks that followed, she received an invitation that stunned her. A performance at a world music festival. It wasn't just any show. It was one where artists from all over the globe came to share their stories through sound. It was her biggest opportunity yet. When she told the billionaire, he nodded proudly. "That's your stage," he said. "But remember, play like you did that first night. Don't play for applause. Play for the silence that follows." She understood what he meant. The best music wasn't about impressing people. It was about touching them so deeply that they forgot to speak. The night of the festival came. The stage lights were blinding and the crowd stretched out endlessly. She sat at the piano, heart pounding. Cameras were rolling. Thousands of people were waiting, but when she touched the keys, all the noise faded away. Her song, the one she wrote for her mother, filled the hall. Every note carried emotion, every pause carried meaning. The crowd was silent, listening, feeling. And when the final note lingered in the air, there was stillness. That deep, pure stillness she had felt the very first time. Then the applause came. Loud, endless, full of love. She stood up slowly, tears in her eyes, and bowed. Somewhere in the front row, she saw the billionaire clapping quietly, his expression proud but humble. That night changed everything again. Her story spread around the world. The waitress who silenced a room and went on to silence the world with one song. But to her, it was never about fame. It was about keeping a promise, to her father, to her mother, and to herself. When she returned home after the concert, she sat by her window, just as she had all those months ago, when her dream still felt impossible. The night air was cool and the city below was alive. She whispered softly, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for giving her one more chance to be heard." After the festival, her life changed in ways she could never have imagined. Every day new calls came in, invitations to perform, requests for interviews, people wanting to collaborate. The once quiet girl who used to wipe tables in a small cafe was now on magazine covers. But with success came a strange emptiness. The cheers and lights were thrilling, but when the music stopped, silence filled her heart again. It was not the peaceful silence she used to love. It was heavy, almost lonely. Fame had brought her far, but it also took away the small, ordinary moments that once kept her grounded. She began to miss her old life. The smell of coffee in the cafe, the laughter of regular customers, and the quiet evenings when she played the piano just for herself. She missed the feeling of being invisible yet content. Now everything she did was watched, recorded, and discussed. Every small mistake turned into a headline. The billionaire noticed the change in her. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he found her sitting quietly in the studio, staring at the piano keys but not playing. "You look lost," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. I thought this was everything I ever wanted, but sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's dream." He nodded, understanding. Fame is a loud companion. It doesn't let you think. "I just miss the music," she admitted. "Not the shows, not the cameras, just the music." He sat beside her and said, "Then play for the music, not for the world. The world will always take more than it gives, but music, it gives back if you let it." She looked at him and saw in his eyes the same quiet strength that had pulled her through before. That night she played again, but not for anyone else, and just for herself. The melody that came out was simple, warm, and real. It reminded her of why she started in the first place. In the following weeks, she made a big decision. She turned down several high-profile offers. Her manager couldn't believe it. "Are you sure?" he asked. "These are life-changing opportunities," she smiled gently. "Life has already changed enough. I don't want to chase everything. I just want to create something honest." Word spread quickly that she was taking a break. Some people admired her courage. Others said she was making a mistake. But she didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt light again. She moved back to her small apartment near the old cafe. Her mother's health was improving, and that gave her peace. Sometimes they would sit together by the window, and her mother would hum softly while she played. Those were the moments she treasured most. Meanwhile, the billionaire continued to run his empire, but his connection with her never faded. They often spoke late at night, not about business or fame, but about life, about how fragile success could be and how little people understood happiness. He once told her, "When I was young, I thought money could fix everything. But money only gives you choices, not peace," she replied quietly. "Music gives me peace, but sometimes it takes my strength away." He smiled. "Then rest when you need to and play when your heart tells you to." A few months later, she decided to do something special, something from her heart. She planned a free street performance. No tickets, no promotion, no stage lights, just her piano, right in the middle of the city square. When people saw her setting up, they couldn't believe it. Word spread fast, and soon a crowd gathered. Some brought flowers, others just stood in silence, waiting for her to play. She looked around and smiled. "This is how it all began," she whispered to herself. Then her fingers touched the keys and music filled the air. The sound wasn't perfect. The city noise mixed with the melody, but it was beautiful. People stopped walking, traffic slowed, and for a few minutes the busy street turned into a concert hall. Her music carried warmth, honesty, and something deeper, the soul of a person who had walked through struggle and found light again. When the last note faded, there was silence, and that magical silence that seemed to follow her everywhere. Then came the applause, louder than she expected. But what touched her most were the tears in people's eyes. She realized then that music didn't need luxury to be powerful. It only needed truth. After that day, she received countless messages from people saying her street performance had inspired them. Students, workers, even elderly people who said they hadn't cried in years. She didn't reply to all of them, but she read every single word. It reminded her that she didn't need a stage to make a difference. As months passed, her relationship with the billionaire deepened into a quiet friendship that felt more like family. He visited her mother often, sometimes bringing homemade soup or books. They laughed more now, less burdened by work or pressure, but even he had his own silent battles. One evening, as they sat in the garden of his home, he said, "You know, sometimes I envy you." She looked at him, surprised. "Why? You have something money can't buy, freedom. You can sit at a piano and express your heart." "I can buy the best piano in the world, but I can't make it sing." She smiled gently. "Maybe you can. You just haven't tried in a while." He laughed softly. Maybe you're right. There was a long pause, and then he said, I've built everything I dreamed of, but the more I built, the smaller the world felt. You reminded me what wonder looks like. His words stayed with her. Not long after that, the billionaire fell ill. It wasn't sudden, but it was serious enough to worry everyone around him. He tried to continue his work, but his health forced him to slow down. When she heard the news, she rushed to see him. He was lying in bed, looking weaker but still calm. You didn't have to come, he said softly. She held his hand. Of course I did. You've done so much for me. Let me be here for you now, he smiled faintly. Then play for me, one last time. She set up her small keyboard beside his bed. The room was quiet except for the sound of her playing. The melody she chose wasn't famous. It was one of her earliest songs, the one she had written before anyone knew her name. As she played, his eyes closed and a peaceful expression crossed his face. When she finished, he whispered, That's what silence feels like. She stayed by his side until he recovered enough to walk again. The bond between them grew even stronger after that. They both understood now how fragile life was, and how music could heal in ways nothing else could. Later, he called her to his office. I have something for you, he said. On his desk lay a folder. Inside was a deed, the ownership papers of the cafe where she used to work. She looked up, shocked. What is this? He smiled warmly. A gift. I bought it quietly months ago. I thought one day you might want to return to where it all started. It's yours now. Do with it whatever your heart wants. Tears filled her eyes. Why would you do this? Because stories like yours deserve a home, he said. Let it be a place for dreamers, a place where someone else can find their song. That night she visited the cafe. It still looked the same, small, cozy, full of memories. She sat at the piano, the one that had started it all, and played softly. People walking by stopped to listen just like that first night. The owner, now older, came out from the back and froze when he saw her. You're back, he said, smiling with disbelief. She nodded, I am. And this time I'm staying. The cafe became something special again. Not just a place to eat, but a small corner of hope. Young musicians began to visit, performing every weekend. She helped them, taught them, encouraged them to keep playing no matter how small the audience was. The billionaire often visited, sitting quietly in the corner, sipping his coffee, listening to the new talents play. Sometimes he would look at her and nod, a simple gesture that said everything. She had come full circle, not as a waitress or a rising star, but as someone who had found peace in her purpose. Her story had inspired millions, but to her, the real victory was that she could now help others find their own voice. One evening, as the sun set outside the cafe windows, she looked around at the soft lights, the laughter, the gentle music, and felt a deep calm in her heart. The journey had been long, full of highs and lows, but it had brought her here, to this moment of quiet joy. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, This is what it means to be home. The cafe became her world again, but this time it wasn't just a workplace, it was a living story. Every wall, every chair, every sound of the piano carried memories. People came from all over just to see the place where it all began. But what made it truly special was how she used it. Not for profit, not for fame, but for people who still had dreams tucked quietly inside their hearts. She started hosting open music nights every weekend. There were no tickets, no auditions, and no judgment. Anyone who wanted to play could come and share their music. Some were shy, their voices trembling as they began. Others were confident but rough around the edges. She listened to them all, smiling, encouraging, guiding. Don't play for perfection, she would say softly. Play for feeling. That's what people remember. The cafe soon filled with young musicians, students, workers, travelers, each carrying a small story inside them. The place came alive again with laughter, clinking cups and the sound of new songs being born. But beyond the music, something deeper was happening. The cafe became a safe corner of the world, where people felt seen and heard. Even those who never played an instrument would come just to listen and feel part of something pure. The billionaire visited often. He never made a grand entrance. He just slipped in quietly, sitting in his favorite corner with a cup of coffee. Sometimes he brought his work laptop but rarely opened it. He said the cafe reminded him of why he worked so hard, to find something that made life worth living. He and the pianist shared a quiet understanding now. Their bond was beyond words, built on gratitude and respect. He had given her an opportunity, but she had given him something far more valuable: peace. One evening after closing time, they sat together at the same table near the window. The lights were dim, and soft music played in the background. He said slowly, "You've done something extraordinary here." She smiled. "I just wanted to give others what I once needed, a place to be heard." He looked around, eyes gentle but thoughtful. "You've created something that will outlive both of us." She was about to reply, but he continued, "You know, when I first saw you in that cafe years ago, I thought I was helping you. But the truth is, you were helping me, reminding me that the world still has soul." She looked down, touched by his words. "You changed my life," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, you changed your own life. I only opened a door, you walked through it." That conversation stayed in her heart long after he left that night. Months later, the billionaire's health began to decline again. He tried to hide it from everyone, but she noticed. His visits became less frequent, his voice softer, his movements slower. She went to see him at his house one afternoon, bringing homemade soup and flowers. He smiled when he saw her. "Still taking care of me, I see." "You took care of me first," she said gently. They sat by the window, sunlight pouring in. He looked outside for a long time before saying, "Promise me something." "Anything," she replied. "When I'm gone," he said quietly, "don't stop playing. Don't let the world make you forget who you are." Tears welled in her eyes. "Don't talk like that," she said softly. He smiled weakly. "It's just a promise." "That's all?" She nodded, unable to speak. A few weeks later, the news came. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was quiet, dignified, just like the way he lived. The world called him a legend, a business genius, a man of vision. But to her, he was something simpler, the man who believed in her when she was invisible. The funeral was private, attended by only a few close people. She played a soft melody at the end, the same one she had played for him in the hospital. As the last note faded, there was silence, the kind of silence he had loved. After the service, she sat alone for a long time, looking at the sky. It was cloudy, but the light broke through in soft streaks. She whispered, "Thank you for everything." A week later, she received a letter from his lawyer. It was sealed in an envelope with her name written in his handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a note that read, "You once told me music gave you peace. You gave me that same peace when I had forgotten what it felt like. I've left something for you, not as payment, but as a thank you. Use it to keep the music alive." Attached to the letter was a document, a trust fund large enough to secure the cafe's future for years to come. It also included a donation to start a small foundation in her name, a place that would help underprivileged children learn music for free. She couldn't stop crying as she read it. His last gift wasn't about money. It was about legacy. It was about giving others the same chance he had given her. The foundation opened 6 months later. It was called The Silence of Music. The name was his idea, written in the papers he'd signed before his passing. It became a small school beside the cafe, where children came every evening to learn piano, guitar, and singing. She taught there herself, often sitting beside the youngest students, guiding their fingers gently over the keys. Some of them reminded her of herself, shy, quiet, unsure. She would smile and tell them, "Don't be afraid of mistakes. Music doesn't judge." As the foundation grew, the cafe became even more famous, but she never let it lose its warmth. She refused to turn it into a business or franchise.
"It should always feel like home," she would say. People began to visit from around the world.
Some came to play, some just to listen, some to leave letters of thanks. The walls were soon filled with handwritten notes, small messages from people whose lives her music had touched. Years passed, but her love for the piano never faded. Every night after everyone left, she would sit alone and play, not for an audience, not for fame, but for herself and for the one man who had once made her believe she could. One particular night, a young girl from the foundation stayed behind after class. She was only 10 years old, quiet but talented. She watched the pianist play and said softly, "When I grow up, I want to play like you." She smiled warmly. "You will. But don't play like me, play like you. That's where the magic is." The girl nodded and asked, "Who taught you how to play?" She paused, her eyes glistening with memories. "Someone who once believed in me when no one else did." The girl smiled and said, "Then he must have been really kind." She nodded. He was. As time went on, the cafe and foundation became landmarks of inspiration. Artists, writers, and dreamers visited to find courage and comfort. And though the billionaire was gone, his presence still lingered, in the piano she played, in the laughter of children, and in the quiet hum of the place he had helped create. On the anniversary of his passing, she organized a small event, not a concert but a gathering. People came with candles, flowers, and instruments. She stood at the front and said softly, "He believed silence could be more powerful than sound. So tonight we'll play one song, then let the silence say the rest." She sat at the piano and began to play. The melody floated through the night air, gentle, emotional, and full of life. When it ended, no one spoke. They just sat in silence, remembering, feeling, understanding. That silence, and that deep, peaceful silence, was his legacy. Years later, when she grew older, she still played every day. Her hands had become slower, her hair streaked with gray, but her touch on the piano keys was just as graceful. She didn't need applause anymore. She only needed that soft moment when the music stopped and the world held its breath. One evening, after finishing her last class, she sat by the window of the cafe. The city outside glowed with lights. She could hear laughter, footsteps, the soft hum of life continuing. She smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered, "You were right. Silence really is the most beautiful sound." She played one last song that night, slow, heartfelt, full of memory. The cafe was empty, but if anyone had walked by, they would have heard the melody spilling softly into the street. And when the final note faded, the world seemed to pause, as if listening one more time, to the song that had once muted a room and changed everything.